Um, well, again, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's masterclass in our current series. My name is Corey Avella. I'm the General Manager for Independent Vets of Australia. Today, I'm delighted to be able to bring to you what we truly believe will be a valued look through the window into three business practices: surviving to thriving. They're all at different stages of their business practice journeys and how they deal with the ups and downs of being a vet and running a busy practice, people management, maximising profitability, culture, and the adaptation needed to evolve from surviving to thriving. At IVA, we get that your business is unique, and that's why you choose to be independent. Our core purpose is to be valued contributors to your successful independence, so you can live the life and that you truly love, and regardless of what business phase you may be at. And we'd enjoy the opportunity, at some stage, to discuss with you how IVA has been able to work with other practices to achieve their goals. And the contact details for us are on the screen, and also will be available to you after the session as well. I'd also like to express our gratitude for their continued and ongoing support from Hills Pet Nutrition, who is our sponsor for today's event. Hills has been a supporter of IVA and our independent practices from our very beginning. Without their support, we would not be able to have ongoing education to our members. So thank you very much for your ongoing support. We really appreciate it. I'd like to now introduce our moderator, Jim Parry of So Brand Strategic Advisory, Melbourne-based independent business advisories specialising in supporting organisations in creating clear strategies that engage and enable growth. Jim has extensive experience of leading teams in marketing strategy and change programs. Jim regularly speaks and attends events, making strategy work and bringing growth and clarity to brand. And IVA has been working with Jim for about the last 6 months and has been a tremendous asset and offers us a fresh independent view on our business. So Jim, I'd like to hand over to you for today's session to introduce our panellists. And thank you all for your time, and we really appreciate it. Thanks, Jim.
Thanks very much, Corey, and hello, everyone. I'm very excited to be here. I'm actually, I think, more excited to hear the answers rather than ask the questions, but I think it's going to be a very interesting discussion we'll have with the panelists who come from quite a wide range of different veterinary practices. So I think we're going to be rewarded with some really interesting insight from the panelists. So as Corey said, we're really here to talk about surviving to thriving in the world of independent veterinary practice. And I think we're going to hear some of the stories and insights from the panelists, all of whom are IVA members. And I think we're going to get, like I said, that rich set of insight from a multi-site practice to a relatively new practice leader. So before I start, let me introduce the panelists. The first panelist I'd like to introduce is Natasha Pesce. Natasha is from Terry Hills Animal Hospital. It's a mixed practice located in the northern beaches of Sydney. And I think the practice has been operating for around 45 years. And Natasha joined after she graduated in 2013 and became the sole owner around late 2018. So welcome, Natasha, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
I'd also like to introduce James Thompson. James is from Turramurra Veterinary Hospital, which is a family-owned, independent and multi-award-winning hospital based in the Ku-ring-gai area of North Sydney. The hospital was established in 2006. It's now newly renovated and is the North Shore's only accredited hospital of excellence. So welcome, James, from what looks like a very nice background you're sitting in.
Pleasure.
And finally, Diana Barker from Evervet Group. The Evervet Group has 3 locations: Prahran, South Yarra and East Melbourne in the Melbourne area. And the group's owned and operated by 4 partners, including Diana herself. And the growth within the group has grown over many years with expansion of the practices and locations. And there's also a 4th practice at Ripponlea, which is outside at the moment of the Evervet Group. So welcome, Diana, to you as well. So thank you all for joining. Well, let's get into it and start the first question. The thing that sort of, having worked with IVA and sort of got to know the veterinary industry, is this sort of balance that you have to strike between being a vet and a business owner. And I guess vets don't start off by trying to be business people, they start off by trying to be vets. So I'd really like to understand what are the trade-offs you've had to make as vets and business owners, and how do you manage that? And maybe Dinah, can I ask you that question first? How do you manage that trade-off, particularly with a multi-site practice?
Thanks, Jim. Yes, it is absolutely one of the challenges that we face, and especially, I guess, from when I started and bought into the partnership. You know, I felt like, I guess I had a lot to prove, and worked quite hard at all the management stuff, and that really came after hours for me. And I definitely didn't achieve that balance in terms of that vet and management balance. Over time, really the vet work has dropped away, especially as we've grown. I have reduced my client-facing hours. I've reduced my actual clinical work, purely just to try and get a handle of the management stuff. And we've also brought in other people to do the job. So business manager has been an absolute godsend, because we're no longer trying to do it all ourselves. We've got a go-to to go to. But even then, again, we've got 4 practices now, and that's happened in the last year. And I'm looking at reducing my clinical hours again. So, and the practice suffers for that. You know, you've got to have that trade-off as to whether or not me being in the consult room or in theatre is more valuable to the practice than me being in the office doing management stuff. So that's it's definitely a challenge.
Yeah,
not
certainly.
perfect.
And roughly, how do you split the percentage time spent on the business focus versus you know, your clinical time? What's the percentage split for you right now?
To be honest, at the moment, for me, it's probably around 60-40. So 60% clinical, 40% business. Having said that, we had a strategy meeting a week ago, and we're looking at restructuring, and we've decided that I'm going to trial going full-time management for 6 months and see how that goes. I'm still going to be there in a clinical capacity in terms of training, but yeah, so that's where the push is at the moment. We need better managerial oversight currently.
Yeah, tough decisions to make. So James, how about you? What does that look like for you in your practice? What trade-offs are you or have you had to make and having to make?
I'm coming out the other end of the tunnel from being swamped by management, and it is unreal. I'm being a clinical vet again, and it's all of the excitement of being a new graduate with none of the terror. So we basically were a little shoebox for 10 years with no windows, no outside light. It was like working in a nuclear bomb shelter or something. And then we've done the major extensions. That took a year of planning, 9 months of building, and then probably a year to get settled in and introduce both a practice manager who's working 30 hours a week and a sort of our first ever receptionist who we've hit the jackpot with. She's ex-Qantas customer service, and she's going to sort of become the head of reception. So I was down to like 5% consulting, and the management can be pretty dreary. It's a lot of HR, counselling, shoulder to cry on stuff that just drives me nuts. You know, the other two, the reception leader and the manager, have now taken over pretty much. And I've got a philosophy: if I've got Management Monday. If I can't get the management that I need to do done on a Monday, it needs to be delegated or wait a week. And then I'm going to be a vet again, and it's a lot of fun.
That's terrific. I like that. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it's just, look, it's such an optimistic moment, I think. It's almost like having had a sabbatical. Perhaps the universities know what they're doing, refreshing their academics by giving them a change every once in a while. But you come back into it and, yeah, gee, it's great. Seeing the clients, seeing the puppies.
Oh, great. Well, there we go. That's what life looks like the other side, I guess. So,
well, I've also got a 3- and 5-year-old boy. You saw one of them just now. So Tuesday's daddy daycare day. So
very good.
Yeah,
that sounds very organised. That's excellent.
Yeah.
So Natasha, for you, as being a relatively new practice owner, albeit the practice has been around for a while, but you're relatively new to owning and running the practice. What are you finding at this sort of relatively early stage of your kind of ownership career? What trade-offs are you having to make?
Yeah, it's been quite a steep learning curve, I guess. I definitely didn't go into vet science ever intending to own a practice, and I think financially it's never something that you kind of, you know, put as a big goal to work towards necessarily. For me, I was just very fortunate. I loved the practice that I was working in, and the partners who were there at the time were at the sort of end stage of their careers. So it just sort of happened that I was there as their sort of transition to retirement kind of strategy. And so I guess for me, you know, I was still quite new into the veterinary profession as it was. So the focus of learning clinical knowledge and, you know, still refining those skills is certainly still at the forefront of what I'm doing. And then adding on that sort of practice management side of things definitely added a little bit of extra sort of stress and obviously time focus. Personally, I was very, very lucky that one of the previous owners still works in the practice. So he was a really good baseline mentor and someone who I could refer to about general practice management decision making. To be honest, his style was pretty passive in terms of practice management. So I think the big thing that I can take away from the initial year is practice management can be as little or as much as you want it to be. Mm-hmm. And I think sometimes giving yourself a little bit of a break, being kind to yourself and realizing that, you know, that week in particular, it's a full-on week. The things that you had set yourself as a management goal, you know, may not work. I think the more you kind of do the management stuff and you realize how much it really helps your practice progress and it helps yourself as a manager progress, you know, only now am I learning how to really be quite strict in managing my time and saying on Thursdays, that's my day off. I'm not going to the clinic, you know, I'm going to focus on management stuff. So I think it's an evolving thing. Initially, I thought that it would be a black and white switch. One day I was just a vet. The next minute I'd buy into a practice and all of a sudden, you know, you'd be full on focused into management. And for me personally, it just hasn't happened that way. It's something that I'm still learning to kind of manage alongside each other day to day and as emergencies and tasks need to be done, I guess.
Yeah, fantastic insight. Really interesting different perspectives. And what I'm hearing here is a sort of combination of being deliberate in what you're seeking to do. Like Diana was talking about planning meetings and James talking about the power of delegation. And one thing you mentioned about being kind to yourself and being flexible, that kind of rings true, but also the value of a mentor. I mean, that's been pretty important to you, I guess, Natasha.
Oh, absolutely. I think, you know, my personality type is that I want to work with people and bounce ideas off people. So it's sort of interesting that I'm in a sole practice ownership position where I don't have, you know, another partner to kind of make those decisions with, but I'm certainly learning to use, you know, the advice of my head nurse, still referring back to the previous owner, I guess not being proud and feeling like I've got to change a million things at once, particularly if things are kind of working smoothly. I have to say James has been a really great mentor, very, very kind to me in my first year as practice owner. And certainly there are lots of resources around to have people to support you and just, you know, bounce ideas off, going to conferences, great hearing that other vets are feeling swamped or that they're going through, you know, their own crisis points. So I think, yeah, it becomes very obvious that there's no one way to do things and you're not fumbling and making mistakes. It's just that you're kind of having to work with the scenario that you're in, really.
Yeah, great. That's really interesting. And so, James, thinking about your role as a mentor, therefore, what have you learned through being a mentor? Because often one can learn as much teaching and helping others as receiving advice. So, what have you learned about being a mentor, perhaps?
Well, be careful. Be careful. I haven't done the formal mentor program such as the AVA. My wife does formal mentoring, and I think it's a a benefit both for the mentor and the mentee. I guess my experience in the past, I've had informal mentors from people like Dick Churcher and John Colvinor down at North Shore Vets, Brian at Alambi Vets, Brian Mills, you know, lovely bloke. And I haven't really ever had a formal mentor, but I think our profession is so friendly and generous by and large that, you know, a genuine approach and a courteous approach will generally get you excellent information and engagement from other professionals.
Yeah. So the value of reaching out, I think, is
absolutely
really important. Yeah.
Yeah.
Good. That's great to hear. So Diana, what I'd like to sort of move the conversation on a little bit, and it's still, you know, people being such an important part, I guess, of any business, and particularly a veterinary practice. I'd like to hear your views on culture, how you view culture, and particularly how you cultivate and manage it across a multi-site practice. So how do you approach culture, and what's your take on it?
Culture is probably the single biggest, most important thing to everyone wanting to rock up at work today and have the place humming. For us, it's really super important. We went through a tough period where we had a couple of maybe what you would probably call toxic people, probably about 5 years ago, and it just took so much energy and effort to weed them out, and we lost a lot of good employees along the way before we recognised that there were one or two individuals that really were causing the problems. They were high performing, they were fantastic people, but just had been with us for a long time, but it had, you know, something had shifted and they just weren't happy anymore. They just needed to be sort of quietly pushed. But yeah, as I said, it took 6 months really for us to get back on track. And we've had a real, you know, really since then, culture has been at the focus of everything that we've done. We have lots of sort of initiatives, and a lot of what we look at is, so I don't know if anybody's read the Dan Pink book about motivation, and just trying to give people that autonomy, mastery and purpose.
Just finished it this morning.
There you go, yeah.
They're all on Audible too. I've listened to it on Audible.
Yeah. So I think that's really applicable to, you know, if you can try and do that to every single one of your employees and try to facilitate that, have an awesome place to come and work, then yeah, people love what they do, and they have some accountability as well around that. In terms of new practices, again, that's probably been our biggest challenge in the last year. Is one of the practices that we bought was already existing, and the culture, needing to change the culture in there was challenging. We initially put one of the directors in there, but it wasn't sort of a long-term solution, and wasn't great for the cultural shift that needed to change there in terms of what we try and achieve in terms of clients and patient care and things. So we actually ended up putting one of our more senior associates there, who's really, really ingrained, has been with us for 30 years. And she's done an amazing job at even just by being there, has just totally shifted the culture in that practice. So having those key personnel that you really can rely on to you know, get the positive vibes up is really important.
Wow, yeah, very, very important. And clearly, I would think you see is also vital in terms of attracting and retaining the best people you can find.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, that's, I guess, one of our key things is really to be an employer of choice, and have people who want to work with us rather than, you know, us necessarily needing to actively recruit, and having a good culture, having our employees, you know, disseminating that we're awesome is, you know, it reaps so many rewards.
Yeah, fantastic. I love the recommendation on the Dan Pink book. I've read it and it's excellent. So, so James, what's your take on culture, and what does it mean to you and your practice?
Yeah, the single biggest realisation I developed was realizing you got to be the captain coach of a team, and sometimes you have to drop someone from that team. You know, you've got to decide what your team want to be. Like, do you want to be, you know, an under-6 soccer team where everyone has fun and you know, that's that, or do you want to have a high-performing team? And I sort of developed in my head the idea that I'm the coach of a team that we want to perform well. And sometimes you've got to drop someone from the team because they're not performing well. They might be the fullback for the team and they keep dropping the ball and not stopping the player coming towards the try line. They might be the nicest guy on the team, popular with the sponsors. They never get drunk or have any ugly incidents. They always turn up on time. Nicest guy in the world. The fans love them, but if they can't perform the job, then they have to go. And the youth of today also are from the Survivor generation and the what are all of these singing shows, and they get they get voted off the island. It doesn't crush them. It doesn't destroy them. They just pick themselves up. So
can I add to that as well?
Yeah.
Since we had our massive, our kind of time where we had to push people leave, we've really taken that sort of approach as well, and using our 6-month probation and actively performance managing people through that month. And if people can't pick up their act or can't perform, then even if we like them as a person, it's just like, I'm sorry, you're not the right fit for us. Even if we think that they might get there in a year, it's just, for us, it's not worth the energy down the track if they haven't picked up their act.
That's a superb point. And I think, just to sort of add my own thought on that, that you're also helping them, because if you've got a set view of your culture and a very clear view of your culture, and somebody is not working well with that culture, then they're not a good fit for both them and for you. So it's actually ultimately a win-win in the long term to take those sorts of decisions, I would have thought. That's really good.
Yeah.
Natasha, what's your take on culture, and perhaps with your evolving practice, how are you starting to impose and develop a culture?
Yeah, I think the fact that I've been working at the practice for a couple of years before taking on that role was really interesting, because like I said, the previous management was very sort of passive, and essentially, so long as everyone turned up and, you know, did their shift to the best of their ability, then the accountability sort of stopped once your shift sort of stopped. And I think there's an interesting shift where you have your own culture, or I guess your own set of standards that you apply to your sort of profession. And then all of a sudden you're sort of having to oversee or assess how everyone else is working around you, and sort of trying to tie that all together and making sure that everyone's on the same page. I guess, you know, you probably haven't been in much of a scenario before where you've had to give people feedback, or, you know, you flag something once, hope it doesn't happen again. If it does, essentially everything rests on your shoulders. So I guess you've also got to change your own perception of yourself in that culture and say, well, really, it all comes to me. There's no one else to blame if people start squibbling with each other and having issues. So I think, you know, it's fantastic if you work in a practice that already has a very identifiable culture. I think sometimes it can be really hard when you step back and you sort of think, well, really, what is it about this place that makes it specifically, you know, unique for that practice? I guess there's probably like two sides to culture that I've started to consider. The client-facing culture, which I think everyone tries their hardest at no matter what, because essentially that's how you get feedback that you're doing your job well. When clients say that, you know, they really enjoyed talking to the receptionist, or the nurses were really lovely. I think everyone has a very good social performance face. I think it's much more important to sort of look inward and look at what the internal practice culture is, and really sort of assessing what are the key sort of flaws, either in the structure of the practice from like a day-to-day functioning point of view, how do, you know, nurses do handovers, how's, you know, the general communication style. So yeah, for me, it's definitely at the forefront of what I'm kind of focusing on, but always a question of, are you doing it right? And I guess you only ever know until you start instigating those changes and sort of see what the feedback is, really.
Very, very true. I think that's excellent. And so actually, I want to ask a question to you specifically, Natasha, about, leadership impact is clearly significant in setting culture. How did you, just thinking back to your sort of story at the beginning, how did you manage the transition from being one of the team to now being the boss? So how did you manage that transition, how people viewed you, and therefore impact on, I guess, your leadership role in culture?
Yeah, I think that's been a difficult kind of thing for me. I think, initially when I was there as a vet, I just, did my job and made sure that the nurses who I worked with felt like they were, part of the management of that case, or that they were, appreciated for what they were doing in that certain scenario. And certainly now I think the leadership has to then take a bigger picture approach and sort of say, well, what are people watching me do potentially? How am I reacting on the bad days where I'm really tired and, someone says something that just gets under your skin a little bit, or you take it the wrong way? Being much more mindful about, what's expected of you as a practice manager and leader, and directly, how does that fit into culture? Are you going to be the sort of person who really just can't be bothered on the day, so you let something slide? And I think that sets up a very sort of easy, culture of don't mention it until it gets so terrible that no one can stand that person anymore. Or do you sort of find a way of going back and readdressing points that you feel might have, had a much more significant impact rather than just that particular scenario on that day?
Yeah.
And I think, articulating that to people, that you're not nitpicking, you're not kind of trying to make them feel selected out. It's just the fact that you're really conscious of the effect that, every individual has on the team. I guess it's interesting hearing Diana's experience, in terms of myself coming from a fairly small single owner practice, hearing how you would have to manage, so many more people. I think, obviously the more opinions you have, the more people you've got to rely on, but also I can imagine that'd make it quite difficult having a very coherent sort of idea about how you want people to behave.
Actually, Diana, just comment on that, will you? How do you manage that? Obviously a fair amount of staff across practice. How do you corral that opinion and make best use of it so it fits with where you want to go?
So we have, I guess it's really around communication and methods, and I guess in some ways COVID has actually made that slightly easier. You don't have to do it all face to face. We have our staff meeting. We have lots of tools. We use Slack. We use Employment Hero for communication. We make sure that the manager's talking in practice to each, at each clinic, to make sure that everybody's on board. But it's a constant challenge. And I would echo what you were saying, Natasha, in, that one of the things that you sort of don't realise when you're an employee is just how much you impact the culture as an individual, especially even as a vet. As vets, you're usually leaders within the clinic, within the practice that you're working within, and just how much your mood or just whatever you say can impact the rest of the team, and even more so when you're an owner. Essentially I reckon you have the ability to kind of destroy a day just with, one word. So really being conscious of that. It's really difficult, such a challenge. Yeah. Especially when you're grumpy.
Fantastic. We're all human after all. One thing I should say as we're going through this conversation to people listening, if you do have a question, we're going to try and have some time at the end for questions. Do pop something in on the chat and just put it to all panelists, and then we'll try and answer some of those questions either as we go through or certainly at the end. So if you've got a question, throw it on the chat. What I'd like to do, I think that's fascinating, that whole cultural aspect, and particularly within veterinary practice. I'd like to just talk a little bit about growth. And clearly, growth is what most businesses look for. And I've no doubt that all of you in your careers have had some hard lessons around, managing your growth journey. James, perhaps I could ask you, thinking back to your journey in growing the business, where has it been most challenging for you? Perhaps where have you had to show the most courage in decision making, whether it be around people or investment? So where have you had to show most
pressing the
courage?
go on the extensions.
Say that again.
Pressing the go button on the extensions and taking out a massive loan, and
yeah,
you know, you've sort of been planning it for a while, but when you're ready to sign that paperwork, you're just going, am I unleashing financial Armageddon upon myself and my family here, or is this going to work out? Take a deep breath and sign it. And so far, touch wood, things are going well.
And how important do you think courage is for you as a practice owner? Is it something that crops up a lot for you, or is it just occasional?
Yeah, I mean, I'm probably a natural introvert who's been forced to become more of a leader or extrovert. You know, I was never the captain of the sports team or anything like that. I was more into individual sports, running and stuff like that, and swimming. So I had to develop that side. I'm not quite sure I'm answering your question, but probably developing yourself as a leader has been is the closest I can give you to an answer.
Yeah.
And there are, you know, IVA have a great conference, although not this year. There are other great conferences out there, the AVA Vet Business Group, there's the Lincoln Group and United Vets Group and so on, but probably IVA and AVA would have been two of the most important.
Yeah.
And Lincoln to a large degree
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
I think if I can sort of just back off what James was saying in terms of like the feedback that I've kind of got from IVA, and I did a few small sessions with Lincoln. You read it in the VBG sort of conference proceedings and things, is that change is always really hard to like instigate and implement. And I think probably for anyone in a leadership position, ultimately things will always just continue the way they are if no one says or does anything. And so that sort of decision of, well, what standard are you going to hold yourself to, and what business would you be happy to stand in front of and say that's mine? And I think there are some very clear things that you feel have to change. Being sort of brave enough to take that on and know that, you know, you're going to have to lead people through things that they're probably not going to be comfortable with. They probably won't really see the reasons for why you're making those changes. You know, a lot of the time, I guess there's a potential for them to assume that it's a financial benefit to yourself and no one else. So I think really being able to step up to the plate and, you know, deciding you want things to change, you want things to be better than they are, because ultimately Monday to Friday will always, you know, roll around. Things will keep happening. Dogs will come in for vaccinations. If you're happy with that, that's fine. But I think you've got to be really honest with yourself. What do you want your practice to ultimately kind of look like and become?
Yep, I agree. You need a goal and you need a plan. And, you know, our goal is to offer the best service in Australia of a small animal general practice. We're not there now. We may never get there, but we're going to have a damn good crack at it. And my wife last night said to me, when you first started talking about that, she just thought I was a nut job. But now she believes it's actually possible. So,
yeah, I like that. That's the power of a vision that sort of pulls you through, isn't it? Your purpose and your vision pulls you through the most challenging times. So, Diana, how do you work with vision and purpose in your practice? What role does that play?
In terms of vision and purpose, we have a similar vision to James. We just, you know, our kind of mission is to do what's best for the pet. A vision, it's hard because we do have 4 partners, and so it's myself and my husband and 2 older vets who are all couples. We're in very different stages of our careers. And so one of the challenges is actually, hey, you know what, I'm young. I want to grow this thing, you know, like it excites me. I'm kind of like, yeah, vet, tick, done. I'm sure I'll be with like James, you know, coming back in, you know, 10 years and keep doing some orthopedics or something. But, you know, at the moment I'm kind of like, yeah, okay, I've mastered that. I need the next challenge. And so, yeah, as I said, I want to grow this, and I am ambitious for it. Whereas my partner's a very different life stage. So there is a lot of challenge there at the moment around how do we tread that sort of line, and how far can I push? How much do they want to do? We definitely have expanded very quickly, and we've got a lot of challenges now in terms of, as I mentioned before, in terms of just sort of consolidating and consolidating the management. So yeah, but then the successes, you know, taking the courage to open the first branch practice, you know, that was big. But then once you've done it, you can move and do the next one. You know,
yeah, fantastic.
It gets addictive.
Actually, I just got a question I might ask, perhaps you, Diane, and see what the others say from Julie. She's saying, is there one secret ingredient or tool that's really changed up how you've been able to thrive, like Slack or Employment Hero, that maybe vets should know about? You mentioned a couple of these, Diana, already, I think. But is there a secret ingredient or tool that you've got that people should know about?
I've been able to thrive. Probably just no. My one tool is probably exercise. That makes me thrive because I've got to take that time for myself or I just go insane. In terms of managing the practice, so Employment Hero is absolutely amazing in terms of what it can do for your HR, payroll, rosters, just, you know, have everything in one place. It's all there. It's got a whole learning management system in there, and it's pretty cheap. So I would absolutely say do something like that. Makes it so much easier, no paper. Slack is good for communication, but can be really confusing. So like it's overwhelming. So I wouldn't say that it's, you know, one tool. I definitely wouldn't say that is making me thrive. And I've got notifications turned off so I don't get bothered. But it's a useful tool. And just your practice management system, I guess, whichever one you choose. Make it easy for clients to log in and get your online bookings. So yeah, I mean, but from a personal point of view, just making sure notifications are off. When you've got time to yourself, spend time for yourself, hang out with the kids, hang out with the family. It's the best thing you can do for yourself.
Great advice. James, what have you got, any secret ingredient or tool that you would swear by?
Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yes.
It's there's a matrix with the 4 areas of your life: urgent but not important, urgent and important, not urgent but important, and not urgent, not important. And it's worth reading the book and then just getting the matrix and writing down all the things you like doing. So surfing, responding to an unsolicited phone call from a phone supplier when you've just installed a new phone system, like not important. But you can find, as a manager, your life gets overwhelmed with demands. If there's anyone out there who's about to buy a practice or about to become a manager, like, it just increases exponentially, the demand on you, and you have to learn to deflect those people. The other second thing would be our Bilby list. We've got a list of the protected species sales reps from about 8 key suppliers: IVA, ProVet, Zoetis, Boehringer, and a few others. And those people we will be very happy to see and interact with almost at any time, apart from the key morning rush. But, you know, if they're not on the list, they're not going to get me.
Yep.
And generally it's our manager now anyway, but they probably won't get the manager either. Some new rep from some new company with some new product that doesn't do what you really need. Just a waste of, don't even see them. Half an hour of your life gone by being polite. It's just a waste. And your time now is worth $1,000 an hour. So just start thinking like that. Is this meeting that I've scheduled for half an hour with some rep about a product I'm not really interested in going to add value to my practice? Probably not.
The other thing I would add is outsource where you can. So if you wouldn't do it, you know, like we've outsourced all of our phones. you know, we've got a virtual receptionist off-site answering our phones for us, means that the people in the clinic can spend client-facing time. You know, if you don't need them physically in the building, and your staff are too well trained, just work out what your priorities are and outsource it.
Very good. Natasha, you were nodding there. Have you got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was going to say, I think, particularly for small business, that I think like you go in really respecting that every dollar counts, and that you've really got to try and sort of be as self-reliant as you possibly can to kind of minimize having to, you know, get other people involved. But ultimately what that means is that you end up taking twice as long to do things that you're not really that good at doing anyway. So I think for me, knowing that someone's going to do it right the first time, I'm hardly going to have to think about it unless they have a question for me, you know, that directly relates to the practice. Even if it seems like you're spending a little bit more upfront, I think being comfortable to just give it a go and see what's the financial benefit, but also what's the sort of lifestyle benefit that gives to you, in a way that it means that you just have one less thing to kind of think about. And yeah, I think that's probably the biggest thing that I was going to add to that part of the conversation. Very good.
Just picking up the sort of theme of sort of insights and learnings. I mean, it's a bit of a direct question. Maybe I'll start with you, Natasha, this time. I mean, can you think of any sort of mistake that you've made that if you had your time again, you would have done differently? And perhaps what are your insights around that? Because we learn sometimes most from the mistakes we make. What perhaps are you willing to share some of the mistakes that you've made in your leadership career so far?
Yeah, I think there's probably like a fundamental shift that, or I taught myself a very hard lesson very quickly, in that, you know, within a couple of months of, you know, buying into the practice. And I guess particularly because I was surrounded by a group of friends who are outside of the veterinary industry. And that was another thing I was going to mention, actually, in terms of resources to survive. I think not making yourself feel like vet is a business of exception. I think sometimes you sort of go to do things and you think, oh, but, you know, vet's really different. We don't do it that way. Essentially, it's a business. Businesses all run, you know, pretty similarly in terms of what they're trying to achieve. So, you know, just try and look outside of the vet bubble, I guess was what I was going to say to that previous conversation. But in terms of mistakes, I think because I had sort of, you know, let the voices get in my head of like, yeah, I'm going to be, you know, the one who changes things and it's going to be great and it's going to be really different. I sort of went in and changed fundamentally the practice management system within like 2 weeks of me deciding that I was going to sort of own the practice, and without having really justified it to myself, let alone the rest of the team. I think very quickly you become exposed and you're in the spotlight about, you know, being accountable for that decision, and then having to coach and be very, very patient with the people around you who have probably been used to using something which in their eyes was working perfectly fine as it was for the last sort of 10 to 20 years. So for me, that was a real pause moment where I thought, okay, I've got to ask myself, why am I making that change? You know, how's that going to impact everyone around me? And if I can't get them to appreciate, you know, my perspective, at least sort of talk them through the fact that you've listened to them and make sure that they're on board. And certainly 2 years down the track, now we're all on the same page. But I think having done it that way really showed me that you can't kind of just bluster in gung-ho and make a decision without any context for the people around you to sort of understand. And I think the thing is that you go home after work, you continue to think about things in your head. So you have a huge backstory and a huge context about where your decisions are coming from. Being able to then walk back into a clinic and sort of articulate that to someone so that it, you know, sits comfortably for them, I think is a really important thing.
That's excellent. And I really like your point about the need to step back and pause, you know, just think and digest before just sort of bowling in. I think it's terrific. James, what about you from your career? What do you look back on and think, wow, that was a big mistake, but I did really learn a lot from it? Can you pick an example of that?
I'll get to that in 1 minute, but I'd just follow up from Natasha. Like, I think there are some things you have to make quick changes for if it's like patient safety, but for more broad changes to practice culture or particularly rostering, you're turning a super tanker, not a speedboat. You've got to set the course slowly and know where you want to go, but it might take 6 or 12 months to get there and bring the team with you.
Yeah.
Biggest mistakes, just blowing up at people. I've had to learn self-restraint. I mean, I am a classic driver. If you haven't done it, you can do a disc profile through ProVet Crampton, do the training. You can do it free on Anthony Robbins, who I'm not a devotee of, but there's a free disc profiling thing, and work out what your personality is. You know, are you amiable? Are you a driver? Are you analytical, or whatever the other one is? I'm very much a driver, and I want to action. Probably like Natasha when she started. Action, action, action. Let's do this.
Yeah.
But sometimes you need to slow down, and if things haven't been done the way you want them to, you need to coach people through that rather than just blow up at them.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, I've learned greater self-restraint.
And Diana, you mentioned your sort of recruitment challenges. Is that perhaps one of the big mistakes, or is there anything else that you would reflect on where you've had your biggest learning?
My biggest learning has probably been a bit in line with these guys. Just I don't like conflict. I'm a big conflict avoider, and what I've learned is that you do actually have to deal with the problems. You can't just bury your head in the sand and pretend it doesn't exist. You do have to find a way to be open. And also around that change management. I mean, we've had so many projects that have been going to be the next best thing that we do, and just because we haven't had the time to do proper change management, it's just fallen flat. We haven't had any uptake, and we're on to the next thing already. And so us actually moving very quickly has been a real challenge, failure for us at times. The recruitment, I think the recruitment's been pretty good. It's just been, again, a bit of a challenge and weeding out those people. There is a question there from Peter just about outsourcing the phone calls.
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer that now?
Yes, please. I was going to ask you. Yeah, well done.
Yeah. So, Peter, our system at the moment, when someone calls, it's a bit like you call a doctor's surgery, you'll get, option 1 for emergency, and that goes straight to the clinic. Option 2 for booking or drug orders, and that'll go to our virtual assistants. And option 3 will be for general inquiries, which will also go to the clinic. So yeah, it's kind of a good way to siphon off. We still answer the phone in the clinic, but it's a good way to siphon off a large proportion of kind of the phone calls that should be fairly routine. Fantastic. Hope that helps. And there's a plethora of companies that offer it online.
Yeah. And James?
Yeah, Diana makes a really good point about avoidance of conflict. I mean, I talk about the disc profile, but I reckon 5% of vets are drivers, and probably half are analytical. Half are analytical and half are amiable. They want to get along with everybody. We're not lawyers. Lawyers, they fight like a sack full of cats. Vets just want to get along with everyone, and some staff members will exploit that amiability, and they will get very tricky so that they avoid you taking action against them. But I'm going to say a statement now that I don't totally agree with, but a friend of mine said as a manager, they're not your friends. If you want a friend, get a puppy. Now, I've had a lot of thought about that. I think my staff at one level are my friends, and I always approach them in a friendly manner, but you do have to just maintain a little bit of reserve, because one day you may have to manage them.
Yeah, I think that's right. Go on, sorry.
It does make it incredibly isolating as well at the top. When you do have to manage these people, and I'm sure Natasha's probably starting to feel that a little bit after 2 years, when you do go from that kind of, being in the gang, and then you go into leadership, it is very easy to become isolated, because when you do start actually confronting them, just trying to manage them. You
don't have to be, though. There's a bell curve, and you need to know who are your allies and who will help and get them on side.
Yeah,
very good.
Absolutely. And know your strengths and weaknesses, delegate. Yeah.
Fantastic. Just, we've got about 8 minutes left. So people listening, if you want to put a question in, do just put it on the chat. We'll try and answer it for you. I guess what I'd like to just do is look a bit into the future. the world's changing. I don't need to go into how that world's changing, but it just seems to change faster and faster. It seems more volatile and uncertain. So for a veterinary practice, what sort of things are you feeling you're going to have to get your head around to thrive in the future? What's coming down the track that you think you've got to be ready for, or at least how has the business got to be set up to be ready for change? So James, what do you have a perspective on that?
I think it's an unknown unknown. There's so much technological change going on with AI and so on. We had a bad cyber attack about a year ago that in retrospect was the best thing that could have ever happened to us. We didn't lose any data, but it was extremely stressful, and we invested like tens of thousands in upgrading our server and cyber security and secure external login and so on. That'll be huge. I think at its heart, vet actually won't change that much. For the country vets, like there's only one way you can get a car. Well, there's two ways you can get a calf out, but that's not going to change in 300, 400 years. And I think a lot of the face-to-face stuff is still going to be really important. Once upon a time, people knew their bank manager. They would go to the post office for human interaction. And I think now they've got their doctor, dentist, and barista and vet. So those few remaining points of important human contact are going to be esteemed and valued more than ever before.
Very good.
So it won't all disappear into sort of satellite consultations and so on. There'll be a lot of people still wanting to come in face to face.
Yeah, I think that's a good balance between technology, I guess, and the power of the human interface. I just want to ask a question to the panel. This has come from, I hope I got your name right, Nice Peter Lauritsen. He's saying, do you think independent clinics are under increased or decreased pressure from corporate clinics? Pricing pressure, recruitment, marketing, technology, and equipment. So does the panel think the independent clinics are under increased or decreased pressure from corporate clinics?
I'm going to say, I don't think it's increased or decreased pressure. I think there's going to be, going on from the question before, I think there's going to be increased consolidation of veterinary practices within Australia over the next 10 years. That's a given. I think in terms of it, if you're running an independent veterinary practice, you really have to have a real clarity of purpose. Do your Simon Sinek's why, start with why, but have a clarity of purpose and find out what your differentiator is. So pricing pressures, you've really got to run your own game. Like, I wouldn't be worried about what the corporates are doing as long as you're true to yourself. And if you decide that you're going to do a low cost, high volume clinic, go for it, but do it well. If you've decided that actually, you're going to be offer the best service in Australia, as James wants to, then, price yourself appropriately and do what you look after your clients. I don't know that there's increased or decreased pressure. I think it's a good option where if you are an independent practice and you're looking to sell out, then great, the corporates can actually, or the consolidators can be good for you. But it's going to be here to stay, and it's just really, you need your clarity of what you're trying to achieve for your clients.
Great point. That sort of pulls you through. Another question from Jason Gray saying, I believe that we've gone too far towards social media in terms of contact points with our clients. We've just employed a client liaison office to survey our clients on a daily basis and just generally speak with our database. What are your thoughts? James, any thoughts on that?
Sounds great. It sounds great. Our head receptionist, well, there was one of them and she was the head receptionist, but we've now recruited two, and we've got a third that we're recruiting as not only a ex-hostie, but ex-Qantas customer service. And she fulfills that role very well. She knows about customer service and is aware of the importance of it. So we get the feedback directly through her. So there's probably a bit of overlap there.
Yeah,
very important.
That human thing you were talking about. Natasha, do you have a perspective on that question around too far towards social media and perhaps losing that insight of customers?
Yeah, I think it's very easy to, I guess when we were talking about outsourcing, assuming that if you give someone or a company, the responsibility of marketing your practice and making sure that you've got social media posts and Facebook and that sort of thing, that you'll always have customers coming. I think probably also feeding back into that question about corporates, the thing that keeps clients coming back to, you know, I think successful vet practices is that they establish a really good connection with a particular vet or, you know, the staff in that practice. And I think trying to complicate that inevitably has its downfall, because you can't keep up with that kind of experience so much. So I think certainly from what I understand and what I'm sort of seeing happening in my practice is that social media is a great way to let people know that you're there. And if anything, it's actually more of a way to engage with your existing clients rather than sort of assuming that you're going to entice someone completely new to your practice, and making sure that that's really consistent with the messaging within your practice, that everyone in the building kind of knows what's out there on social media and uses that as a talking point within a consult, I think is really important.
Fantastic. Now, we've got about 2 minutes left, so I'm just going to ask the panelists to perhaps just conclude very briefly. What's the best piece of advice, whether it's from a mentor or somebody else, that you've ever received, and why? Diana, what's the best piece of advice you've ever received? Put you on the spot.
That was a really tricky one for me because, but I actually am, I've said it before, I think just knowing your purpose, starting with why, and everything will be okay.
I think that's excellent advice. James, what's the best piece of advice you've received? You're on mute, by the way.
Oh, gee, I think I'd come back to the Stephen Covey thing, and which, you know, the message in the end of that is don't waste time.
Yeah, fantastic.
But do take time out. Do take time out and have some idle time once in a while as well.
Very good. Natasha, any words of wisdom from any advice you've received?
I think, yeah, but sort of what I said early on, just to be kind to yourself, give yourself a little bit of a break and realize that you're doing something, you know, a lot bigger than a lot of people will ever get to experience in their careers or their lifetime. I think also remembering that you're not just a vet, or you're not, you know, just a practice manager. You've got a life outside of all of that that's happening as well. So making sure that, you know, your identity doesn't solely focus on, you know, what's going on within that building, but sort of giving yourself a bit of a broader perspective. Yeah, I think it's important.
Well, I think we're going to have to close. It's 2 o'clock. My heartfelt thanks to all of you, 3 of you. It's been really, really interesting. The hours just flashed by and we could have spent another 2 hours. So thank you so much. We've learned a lot about balance, culture, growth, people, what's going to happen in the future, and insights. It's been terrific. So thank you all very, very much. And I'll hand back to Corey.
Thank you, Jim. And to our panelists, Diana, James and Natasha, I'd also extend our heartfelt thanks. It's been a tremendous session, and certainly it's good to be the person sitting on the outside and looking at the chat and the audience, and everyone's been engaged, because no one's left, which is always a good sign. So that's fantastic. So thank you. So you can have a drink now, James. You're actually on the clock. So well done.
Cup of tea.
So look, thank you again, everyone. We really appreciate it, and it's been great insight, and it's good to get different perspectives from different stages of business owners, and very insightful. So to our audience, again, we thank you for your attendance today. We really appreciate it, and it's always good to be able to sort of offer sort of valued sessions like this, and to something a little bit different too. I think was kind of what we're hoping for today, and I think we've been able to achieve that. We have been recording the session, as many people have asked, and we will be sharing that with the registrants of the event as well. So thank you again for everyone. Thank you again for Hills, as I said earlier, who sponsored us today. Always a great supporter of ours, and we'll certainly enjoy the partnership that we have with them. So ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Jim, thank you for moderating today as well. So thanks all, and have a great afternoon, everyone. And we'll see you again for the next set.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Corey.
you.
Bye.
Thank you.